So, while surfing the web, I keep a close eye on discussions surrounding the new SpongeBob episodes that are coming out. At this point, I might as well be wearing a badge that says I like modern SpongeBob on it. Now, modern SpongeBob isn't exactly the most popular thing in the world. It tends to get a lot of criticism, and sometimes I can look at that criticism and say, yeah, that's fair. And then there are times I think it's kinda forced. But one of the more recent complaints I've seen about modern SpongeBob is that Tom Kenny is getting too old to play SpongeBob himself, and as a result, SpongeBob's voice sounds completely off.
I never learned how to tie a tie!
Now, SpongeBob isn't the only show where this kind of conversation pops up. The Simpsons also gets comments like this from time to time, especially concerning Marge.
Did you get the picture? Was my crack centered? Oh, Bart, it was perfect.
So I kinda wanted to tackle this conversation about these two shows from my own point of view, because I think it's an interesting conversation that's worth discussing, and possibly even debunking. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to bring up is something that not a lot of these comments consider. People age. Both of these shows are some of the longest running cartoons of all time, with SpongeBob being 25 years old at this point and The Simpsons being 35! Quite literally the longest running cartoon of all time. Now, whether these shows should be running this long is not my department. I'm not here to discuss that today. But the objective fact is that both of these cartoons have been running for a very, very long time. Now, voice acting for any amount of years will strain your voice, even if it's just a little bit. But I think an important consideration here is that both SpongeBob and Marge share something unique in common, and that they're both a very unique voice for their respective voice actors to pull off. And they're also both yellow, but Now, if you know anything about Tom Kenny, it's that he's a voice acting legend. Voicing SpongeBob, of course, but also Ice King, both the mayor and narrator from the Powerpuff Girls, and that one side character from the show you vaguely remember as a kid, but not really. I'm sorry, that was a little bit too mean. Class of 3000 is actually really good. You should watch it if you get the chance. Now, I'm pretty sure SpongeBob is Tom Kenny's longest lasting role. At least on a consistent basis, unless we get that new Spyro game anytime soon. But I find this really interesting because SpongeBob is also one of Tom Kenny's more unique voices. Now, it's not like he never did it prior to SpongeBob. There are a few times where he does do a voice similar to him.
I'm Jimmy Briskin. You might know me better as Ewok Villager number 2 from the hit film Return of the Jedi.
But, especially in the current day, it's one of his more high-pitched roles. Usually Tom Kenny plays parts that are around Spyro or Heifer's range, but SpongeBob is very outgoing, upbeat, and loud, so he has a naturally high voice to match. And with Tom Kenny being 62 years old now, I can understand why that would be a little bit harder to do. Especially while keeping consistent with SpongeBob the main show, the spin-offs, and even the Kids' Choice Awards. Julie Kavner is in a very similar boat, having primarily voiced Marge for so long that I don't think most people know what her actual voice sounds like. Well, wonder no longer, because here it is from an interview from 30 years ago.
Well, how long did it take you to say yes when she said, I want you to play the lead in this movie?
Sure.
About that long.
Obviously, after doing Marge's gravelly voice for 35 years, she would sound a little different. Until I realized she's also been voicing Marge since the first Tracy Ullman short in 1987, meaning that Julie Kavner voicing Marge in The Simpsons predates The Simpsons. Now, I think these two characters' unique voices are actually an integral part of why they're a part of this conversation. Because usually when this talking point comes up in conversation, it's always these two actors. I find this interesting because the other cast members have been voicing their characters just as long as these two have, sometimes even doing multiple roles per episode. Dan Castellaneta, I am very sorry if I just butchered his last name right there, has obviously been voicing Homer since the beginning, but also Grandpa Simpson, Krusty the Clown, and various side characters. And he's not much younger than Kavner. Harry Shearer, a fellow Simpsons cast member, is 80 years old, and yet he still continues to voice various characters on the show to this very day. Though, in the case of Mr. Burns specifically, I think he's really phoning it in these days.
Another movie? Besides Oppenheimer?
Dude, you're not even trying. Roger Bumpus is actually a decade older than Tom Kenny. Squidward is actually kind of a hard voice to hit in a similar vein to SpongeBob. But Bumpus can still hit those classic Squidward screams just as well as he could 20 years ago. Overall, while hitting these kinds of voices consistently for over 20 years can be difficult, both of these actors are extremely skilled at what they do, and I think they've proven that their age isn't a huge factor in how their voice sounds. In fact, there's actually a show that's been running on just as long as SpongeBob that kind of proves my point. Family Guy has actually been running for about as long as SpongeBob, yet I never see the same complaints directed towards this show's voice actors. Alex Borstein actually got nominated for an Emmy just this year for her role as Lois, one of many Emmy nominations under her belt, and let me just say she definitely deserves that. So needless to say, while age is definitely a factor in these voice actors' performances, they're definitely still cracked at what they do. What I do think has a bigger impact though is direction. Season 13 or 14 isn't the first time SpongeBob's voice has changed in the past 25 years, far from it. His voice was already changing as far back as Season 2.
Oh, Mr. Krabs? Can I get my paycheck? Never mind, Pat. Sandy said not to come in.
Don't you see, Squidward? It's closed! proposed. Today I feel like doing some dancing.
What are the results?
It lives! My Krabby Patty lives!
I'm sure by now you get the point. Having been on the air for so long, both of these shows underwent a process called Flanderization. In fact, The Simpsons is literally the show the process is named after. In short, if there's a character in a show that's been on the air for a long time, typically the direction will involve reducing them to their most notable traits. SpongeBob is definitely a victim to this trope, especially in the mid-seasons. The humor got dumbed down a little, and there were definitely a lot of moments where the joke was just that the characters are screaming, or crying, or both. The reason I bring this up is that this new direction also kind of changed SpongeBob's voice. In the earlier seasons, he would still scream, but his general speaking voice was more relaxed. But in the mid-seasons, he became a lot more hyperactive. The post-sequel era made him a little bit more relaxed, but he still never really lost that hyperactive streak. And considering SpongeBob has kind of sounded this way since season 6, I don't think Tom Kenny is very interested in going back to the season 2 to 3 kind of method of speaking. It's not like he's incapable of doing it either, because he was just at Comic-Con last week doing the Help Wanted SpongeBob voice. And needless to say, he pretty much nailed it.
Hey, don't come back till you get one.
Aye, aye, Captain. One hydrodynamic specimen with port and starboard attachments. Turbo drive coming right up, sir.
I actually think Marge is one of the lesser Flanderized characters in The Simpsons. At the start of the millennium, they started doing a lot of gimmicky episodes with her, but I don't think she's even close to the same level as her husband in terms of Flanderization. I think the main thing that changed about her voice over time, though, is that it became a lot less sweet and a lot more blunt. Like, over the years, she kind of became more down-to-earth.
While we were rescuing your husband, a lumberyard burned down. Don't! Might as well clean this while I'm killing myself.
I know that's probably a bad example, but that line is really funny, I'm sorry. Oh hey, she's holding a sponge. I think the most important thing about this conversation, though, is that people act like these actors are doing this against their will or something. And to that I have a very important thing to say. It's not really your fucking business. I don't think these actors made a deal with the devil or something. If they want to quit, they would by now. At last year's Kids' Choice Awards, Tom Kenny says he loves doing the SpongeBob voice. I don't really imagine much has changed in the past year. And Kavner seems pretty enthusiastic about doing Marge's voice all these years. I wonder why that is. Holy shit! Overall, despite their age and the characters they play, I think these two are still extremely good at what they do. They voice two of the most iconic cartoon characters, and hey, they deserve all the praise they get. So, until they decide to retire or their respective show ends, which doesn't seem likely, I'm happy to continue supporting these iconic voice actors' careers. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.